Welcome back. It is said to be the largest refugee camp in Africa, but soon it could be closed. The Kenyan government wants to dismantle the Dadaab camp in the wake of the horrific attack on the nearby Garissa University. 148 died in the massacre, most of them students, and President Kenyatta vowed to take action. Along with the rest, the response is focusing on the camp about 60 miles away. Now, it's home for some 350,000 displaced Somalis. Kenya's government says it is also the hiding place for al-Shabaab militants involved in the university massacre. Kenya has told the UN refugee agency that runs the camp to shut it down in 3 months. Well, Mark Yarnell is a senior advocate with the Refugees International. Mark, welcome to Orig Review. How long have people been living at the Dadaab camp, and what brought them there?
Well, the Dadaab camp opened in the early 90s, in 1992, as a result of the collapse of the Somali government and the civil war there. And so people began streaming from Somalia into Kenya. And the hope was that it would be a temporary solution or for people to seek refuge. But given continued instability, food shortages inside Somalia, the camp has now been there for over 20 years. And as you said, I mean, it's basically the size of Kenya's third largest city now.
Well, you know, we throw out a lot of adjectives here. Kenya's third largest city. A lot of our viewers may not know how big that is. Give us an idea of the size and scope of this camp.
It's overwhelming. I mean, flying into Dadaab, into the town where the camps are based, it's just miles and miles of rows and rows of tents. And again, even though it's the size of a city, it's established as meant to be a temporary refuge point. So even though people have been there for decades and some people even born there, it's just mile after mile of UN tents and very limited permanent infrastructure.
You know, I've got to ask, I'm scratching my head about this. We're talking about thousands of people. What happens if all these people get displaced? Where do they go?
That's a great question. I mean, it would be absolutely horrific. The conditions inside Somalia, while some areas have become more stable, there's still close to 1 million people in Somalia who themselves are food insecure, and certainly there's violence continuing in certain parts. So it's a question, and it's something that Kenya hasn't fully explained. Of if you shut down the camp, do people go to Uganda? Do they go to Ethiopia? Because for many, Somalia remains still too unsafe to return to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just mentioned that a few minutes ago here. Obviously some are going back voluntarily, but as you mentioned, of course, they could be facing violence or even worse when they go back. The question here I've got to ask, is Somalia able and stable enough to take some of these refugees back?
Well, I mean, what's happening now, and Kenya has agreed to this, is there's been a framework set up between Kenya, UNHCR, and Somalia to begin the process of facilitating return for those who do wish to voluntarily go home. And it's being done in a very careful, deliberate way. Since the start of the year, about 2,000 people have returned, and the program is meant to continue. But again, it's a very small scale. It's deliberate. It's at a scale at which those people can be received and supported when they return home. To try to push, over 300,000 people into Somalia would be a massive humanitarian catastrophe, and it's quite unthinkable. And I think we're hopeful that while the threat has been made, Kenya won't actually move forward with this action. You know,
Mark, I can bring up two words now. It's the human condition. And when you get those two words involved, and we're talking about consequences of dire concern, people running out of money, running out of time, food, and stuff like that, I'm looking at a situation here that's kind of dire if this camp is closed.
Oh, it would be a disaster, of which the world hasn't seen in a while, and what's so tragic is it would be something that's deliberate and man-made, and I think that this assumption by the Kenyan government that people can go and live on the Somali side in camps there. I mean, people would be inaccessible, unable to be reached, and you could have a real disaster on your hands.
You know, Mark, you know as well as I do that there's been some criticism, and maybe not a little bit, that the Kenyan authorities took a long time to react to the Garissa attack and didn't do enough to prevent it. And I guess my question to you, Mark Yarnell, is this. Is cracking down on this refugee camp going to do anything to really help the situation there?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that Kenya's got a real serious terrorism problem, and no question the government needs to take steps to address that. But in wanting to show it's doing something, it's easy to scapegoat the refugee population, and punish a non-voting constituency, but in the end, you end up hurting people themselves who fled to escape from al-Shabaab. So I think this really is a case of the government wanting to show they're taking action, even if that action isn't addressing the root of the terror problems.
I tell you, Mark, another situation for Arise News to keep our eyes on, and of course, we're on the case. And thank you for being on the case, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks for covering this.
Okay.